So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Paul's 4 p.m. webinar. I think this is about the 13th one we're running now since the end of April. So it's really nice to have you with us. And I know we have a few regulars, so I'd like to firstly invite the new people, and welcome you. And I'd also like to welcome people that will be watching the recording afterwards. And we trust that you will find this of a lot of value, and that there'll be information here that you can use. So let me introduce our guest, Siphiwe. Do you want to just say hi to everyone?
Hello, everybody.
So this is Siphiwe Moyo, and let me just tell you a little bit about him. Siphiwe has an HR background. He's a speaker and facilitator. He's an organizational behaviorist, a career strategist, and an author of an upcoming book titled Your Next Move: Career Strategies to Survive and Thrive During COVID-19 and Beyond. So, Siphiwe, I'm just going to dive straight into it, and I'm going to ask you, what are you hearing right now from your HR colleagues regarding the impact of COVID-19 currently in the workplace?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Paul, for having me. And as you said, you know, I have an HR background, and I'm still quite involved in some of the HR committees in the country, and now because of COVID, even all over the world. So in the Association of HR People, we're starting to have conversations with other people as well in some other parts of the world. And there's a few things that I think my HR colleagues are telling me. First of all, obviously, a lot of companies are under pressure. A lot of companies are under pressure in terms of their top line, in terms of their revenue. So, you know, companies are obviously going to try and save costs. But many of the HR people are telling me that, you know, many of these big companies are going to try and save jobs. They're going to retrench people as a last resort. But there's just no doubt that there's going to be some job losses. You know, so people will try. Many people are already having salary cuts. Bonuses have been scrapped in corporate South Africa and in some other companies. In fact, I think it's one of the banks, I think it's FNB, who've just released already an indication that most South African employees are having in the region of about 20% cuts in terms of their salaries based on what comes into their bank accounts. Yeah. So we know that many companies are going to try to save jobs, but we already know that a lot of companies have no choice but to also retrench. And they're going to do two things in terms of retrenchment. Firstly, they're going to try and do some voluntary retrenchments. So a lot of people will be given an opportunity to say, look, I've always been wanting to go for my business. This might be the chance for me to go start that business. Could I volunteer to be retrenched and get a package? But there's also going to be what people call a Section 189, where companies will have some forced retrenchments. It looks right now, some companies are going to cut in the region of about 10% of their employees beyond this. But the first thing that they want to do is to save jobs. But because of that, there's going to be other things that are happening in the market. So for example, there are other people who are going to have reduced working weeks. So they'll retain you, but they'll probably say, is it possible for you to work 2 or 3 days a week? There are people who are going to have what we call hybrid type of employment, where companies are saying, you can be an employee and an independent contractor at the same time. So before COVID, the Labor Relations Act had always clarified that distinction, that line between an employee and an independent contractor. So it looks like that line is going to get blurred a little bit. And some people are going to be both independent contractors and employees at the same time, which gives you an opportunity, if you've always loved going into business, it gives you an opportunity to get the stability factor and at the same time go and launch something that you like. So there's some few things that are going to be nice for people who've always wanted to have a plan. And I think we'll finally have flexible working practices. One of the things that in corporate people have been talking about for a very long time is having flexible working practices. In other words, being managed in terms of your output, not what time you come in at work. For many years, corporates have been struggling with that. It looks like it will finally happen, and it will be brought to us by this unfortunate pandemic. The other interesting thing, yeah,
sorry,
sure.
I'm just finding this very interesting. Just to hang on to that thought that you had there about the interesting thing. But what I'm finding quite interesting is that the specter of job losses has always been seen to be a relatively negative thing when it comes to the individual. But from a company's point of view, they've invested so many years in that particular individual that it's as big a loss for the company really as for an employer if they let an employee, if they let somebody go completely.
It is a huge loss, and that's why many HR executives are telling me that's going to be a last resort. They're trying their best to retain the skills, and they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They just know that they've invested in this person so much. They know the institutional memory that this person has.
Of course.
And what they're trying to do is to make sure that this person actually does not go. So particularly if you are highly skilled, highly experienced, a lot of employers are going to be trying all kinds of ways to retain you. In fact, there's a nice term that is emerging in the market called anti-fragile employment practices, employment practices that can remain robust even in the next pandemic, if we ever have one, where instead of paying somebody things like pension funds and so on, you release them a little bit, but you can still have them contributing to your team. So many companies will actually access talent instead of employing talent. So they will have you on their books and they will access you every now and then, but you remain a kind of hybrid type of employee, which is going to be a very interesting space, first of all, for people who are experienced, but also for people who only left corporate because of the inflexibility. So there's a lot of people who only left corporate because it was just inflexible before this pandemic. In fact, they loved their jobs, but they wanted to work from home. They loved their jobs, but they had other things going. But the conflict of interest legislation or policies in corporate were quite restrictive. And that space is opening up for people who have a lot to contribute, who only left their jobs, particularly because of this inflexibility, to go back and say, okay, I'll do something for you once a week or as and when you have some outputs for me.
To me, it sounds as if it's not only companies that are being forced to change their mindsets, it's also employees, particularly invaluable employees, who are able to, instead of being afraid of losing their jobs, are able to change their mindsets and see themselves in a different light in terms of being desirable people for companies to insource.
Absolutely. I think initially everybody had a bit of fear and it was understandable. In fact, not a bit. Everybody was quite scared about the prospects of job losses, and that's fine. That is absolutely understandable. But one of the things I tell people now is that if you've always been a valuable employee, if you've always had skills and experience, this is the right time to think about repackaging your entire service and position yourself as some kind of a service provider, even if you never thought of yourself as an entrepreneur. I think many people had always said, I'm not the entrepreneur type, I'm an employee type, which is fine, but there's an interesting kind of shift that is happening where even if you've never thought of yourself like an entrepreneur, you could package yourself and sell the very same skills you were using as a corporate employee, sell it to your current employer, but because of the flexibility that is coming, you can sell it to 2-3 other employers, which
is so clever.
It is so clever, and it's an amazing opportunity for a lot of people, because if you think about it, this is the time where you get paid based on the value that you are bringing, right? And you've always brought a lot of value. Yes, you might have been scared that I'm going to lose my job, but if a few people right now are in fact volunteering to their employer, and they're not even waiting for the employer to institute the so-called Section 189 retrenchments. They're literally approaching the employer and say, I know you're going to have to reduce your headcount a little bit. I have this idea. I could save you some money in terms of fixed costs, and you can have me as a variable cost. In other words, you're going to use me maybe a few days per month. It gives you space to sell the skills to other people, but it helps you not to go through processes where you might actually retrench people who do not want to be retrenched. Give me a bit of space to maneuver and put me on variable pay, allow me to work for other people, and I'll still work for you at the same time.
You know, I've never fully understood. I've kind of understood what you do, but I've never fully understood what you do up until now. And now I realize that actually what you do is that you move companies and people from a fear mindset in the workplace to a full-on opportunity mindset where they look at the value of their own offering and how they can bring value to one another's situations.
You've just diagnosed me.
I'm glad I did.
That is it, Paul. You know, and I deal a lot with mindsets, but I also love infusing that with practical strategies. So you have both companies and employees being in a space of fear right now, and there is just something in between. There's something where you can leverage the kind of space that we are in. For example, one of the things that corporate had always struggled with is that career progression was always some kind of a ladder to climb, right? And it was becoming very clear just a few years ago that it is no longer sustainable to promise people vertical movements, because careers are generally just changing from, you know, ladders into some kind of lattice, some jungle gyms type of movements. And although just a few years ago, people frowned upon it taking a demotion, there's a few people that we've convinced in the last few months that in fact, a demotion might be just what you want, because for you, you've always wanted to work in this department. There's never been any space in this department before. You probably can't go in at the same level that you're in. What if you just took a demotion and worked in that space, and then we free you up for 2 days to do something else? What if you had a lateral move that you could take as well, get into the space that you've always preferred, a space where that excites you, a space where you've always wanted to be, but you've been a bit fearful. What if you were to take that lateral move right now, go horizontal instead of vertical, but free yourself up to do things that you're passionate about? So it is exactly that.
That is absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that we've identified in the work that we've done is that so often somebody gets blocked, someone who's really good gets blocked because on the rung above them is someone who's never going anywhere, and they can't move beyond them because of the politics. So what they do is they either leave departments or they leave the company completely and maybe come back 3 years later in order to leapfrog that person that was standing in their way.
That is so true. And a lot of people do that. And so one of the things that is happening now, in fact, one of the biggest trends that I think is going to emerge is that the internal talent mobility is becoming so critical right now. Instead of losing that person for going outside, you could move them to a totally different department where their passions can be stirred up. And firstly, at least you still have them within, but then you also have them doing the things that they've always wanted to do.
But I've got another thing here. Sorry, if you can just hold on to that thought. Another thing that's quite important is if you are grooming a leader who's going to eventually be presiding over a number of different divisions, maybe, it's a very good idea for them to have experience in various different departments, which means that maybe for, every year they get shifted to different departments so that at a later stage they can eventually take up a senior management position.
It is absolutely true. And many corporates now, what they're telling people, especially people that they're grooming for senior management,
Yeah.
is that depth is okay in terms of your profession, but you're going to need far more than depth. You're going to need breadth in your position. And you're so spot on. And many people frowned upon it before. They're like, no, why should I learn about finance? Why should I learn about HR and all of that? I'm an operations guy. But many people are realizing that a T type of approach to your development is very critical for leadership. And that's exactly what you are saying now, that you don't need a leader who's one dimensional. And this is such an opportunity to play a little bit of chess in our careers to prepare ourselves for that.
And tell me about this philosophy that so many people have in organizations, that it's very, very difficult to get to the top. And, I'm never going to get there because someone's going to be blocking me. In actual fact, the reality is that it's very, very difficult to find people that are versatile enough to occupy those top positions, simply because they sometimes haven't thought wide enough and haven't got an understanding. For instance, what I'm saying is, if you get an operations man, as MD, and he hasn't got experience, say, of finance and HR and what have you, that company is going to be run in a certain way. And if another MD had to then take over from him afterwards, and he happens to be a finance guy, you're going to find that that company is run in a completely different way.
Absolutely. And we've seen companies, we've seen divisions that take the form of the person in charge. When a marketing guy is there, you can see there's a bit of flair. When the finance guy is there, they are very risk averse. And that's exactly that. It's exactly because people have not become multidimensional enough.
Yeah.
People only wanted vertical movements.
Yeah.
And we've been telling people in the last few years that sometimes you don't need vertical movements in order to progress.
Yeah.
A few horizontal movements can allow you to skip a level or two when you are actually ready. So instead of a linear type of vertical movement, you can get a bit of breadth and go to operations and marketing and HR. And eventually after that, you can skip a level or two and become the MD because you really know that organization very well. And some of the fights that companies have had in the excos, for example, you would see that when that MD comes from credit, you'll see that suddenly that exco is risk averse. When they have a salesperson, they are quite aggressive, mainly because they are lacking exactly what you're saying.
And what you really are looking for is for somebody to have the wisdom that when they move up to the CEO or the MD position, that they have that ability to rather just conduct the orchestra and bring in the talents of a carefully selected leadership team that is going to guide those various divisions without too much interference, hopefully.
Exactly. And you know how difficult it is to report to somebody who doesn't have that orchestra type of thinking, because what you are at that level, you need to get results through other people. But if you haven't learned that, or you haven't made that transition in your head, and you are a marketing person, what you then start doing, you get too involved in the marketing and you ignore everything else in the organization. And now you are stepping down to do something that your head of marketing should be doing, and you are not doing your job. And you could see that organization suffering mainly because you have not learned that your role has changed. Your role is now that coordination of those nice voices, instruments, in order for the organization to bring out the best music.
Okay, so I've got a few questions here that we've almost answered already. For instance, are job losses inevitable? And the answer to that has got to be yes, but in those losses, there is opportunity for not only the employer, but the employee. And we've mentioned that already. So let me just ask you this. What are some career strategies that I could employ to survive and perhaps even thrive during and beyond the pandemic? And we don't know when beyond is, but beyond.
It's thinking of the current pandemic as an opportunity. Excuse me. It's exactly what we've been talking about, is taking responsibility for your career, literally going to your boss and asking, or your leaders and asking, where are we going? What is our digital transformation strategy right now? How are we coping? What are some of the jobs that will emerge from this? And literally owning those jobs and proposing, if you even want, proposing new jobs that were not there. It's about raising your hand and saying, there's something that needs to be done. It's not in my job description. Nobody knows what a job description is anymore. Nobody cares about the job description anymore. There's a job to be done. I'm raising my hand to do it. And because many of the jobs that are emerging, there's no expert anyway. There's a lot of companies that have to suddenly do e-commerce that we're not doing it. There's no expert anyway. What they're looking for now is adaptability and agility. It's about raising your hand and saying, I can do it, I can try it. And that's such an important thing, that every organization we speak to right now is doing some kind of assessment on who's the most adaptable and agile people they have, because those are the people that they're taking into the future.
But I guess then that those employees, at whatever level in an organization they are, those employees that have got into the habit of taking responsibility, of volunteering for things, of coming up with new ideas, those are the ones that are already a few steps ahead of the pack.
Oh, absolutely, they are. In fact, I spoke to somebody about a month ago, and I said to them, there is a COVID-19 work stream at your workplace. I might not even know a lot about your workplace, but I can tell you now that there's a COVID-19 response committee or work stream. Just volunteer yourself to be there, because if you're in that committee, you are going to know what the company's response is. You are going to know the jobs that are going to be impacted. You're going to know the jobs that are emerging, and you suddenly position yourself for that job. So these things like showing initiative, taking responsibility, and all of those very good competencies are very critical right now.
There are hundreds and thousands of organizations that need to hear your message and what you've just said now. I'm going to ask people to, if they have any questions, to please put them into the Q&A. But while they're busy thinking of that, Siphiwe, if people need to get hold of you, what is the best way to do that? If people want some more information, they want to access your services, they want to know how they can get more of your wisdom, how do they contact you?
Thank you so much, Paul. So my website is siphiwemoyo.co.za. My email is on the website, which is siphiwe@siphiwemoyo.co.za. And that's the best way to contact me. So I respond to emails quicker than I respond to calls, because most of the time I'm facilitating and I don't have access to the email. So if you really want to get hold of me, Siphiwe, spelled S-I-P-H-I-W-E, siphiwe@siphiwemoyo.co.za.
So then, assuming now I'm a leader and I've had to unfortunately let go of some staff, and in a sense you already partially answered this, but if you could maybe just expand on your answer, how do you keep the remaining staff motivated? Because obviously some of them are going to be inculcated with fear. So what's the strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think one of the things that leaders do not know is that, it is much better to be brutally honest with your employees. If you want a resilient and optimistic employee, you don't hide reality from them. So one of the things that we must do, we must communicate. In times of crisis, leaders must communicate more, not less. So what you want to try and do is to be very as transparent as you can about what is going on in the business, and let people face reality head on. Don't hide it at all, because what you are balancing right now is to be brutally honest with the state of the organization, but at the same time, maintain that positive spirit, right? And that's the balance that you are trying to give right now. Brutally honest, but with a positive spirit. So if you have employees, just stay close with them, communicate with them, and also just be human about it. People have fears, people have anxieties. If they make some mistakes here and there, be forgiving where you can, and bring them closer to you right now. If you know that this person is always on top of things and they make mistakes, this is not the time to hammer at them. Just be kind and motivate them. You have to ask yourself, whatever action that I'm doing, does it demoralize or does it inspire my team, especially in this tough time? If it demoralizes them, maybe you don't want to do that.
And I think that it's even more important in these times. It always has been important, but it's even more important that when somebody really does something well, to heap a bit of sincere praise on them and try and do it in front of others, because it catches on. And when people hear somebody getting praised, they think, hey, I'd like a bit of that, and they go and do something right so that they'll be praised.
Absolutely. I think that old adage of praise publicly and admonish privately if you have to is so true right now, because people right now are feeling anxious. So be a bit generous with praise. Of course, it must be genuine, but be generous with praise. And if you have to correct them, maybe try and do it one-on-one, not in front of people.
Very much so. I've got a great question here from Ray. Ray's asking, how does Siphiwe see the role of salespeople in what he's been speaking about now? I mean, I can say right now that if you ever needed your salespeople, it's probably now.
It's probably now. You need your salespeople more than ever before, and it is a role of also inspiring them, because they are facing some rejections as well. So also just to encourage them and remind them that you are not a bad farmer just because there's no rain. Things might be dry out there. We're in a dry season. You're not a bad farmer because there's no rain, but you still need to go out there and do the work that you need to do. And so you need them. They need a different approach as well. They need, obviously, to care about the client, maintain client relationships, but it is the skilled salesperson that will be able to get to the bottom of what the customer actually needs, that they can still sell even in tough times.
So to a large extent, really, one needs to be even more motivating towards your salespeople in proportion to the added amount of rejection they're getting at the moment, because there probably isn't as much money flowing around. So that additional management encouragement will probably play a huge role in keeping your best salespeople motivated.
So true. I think, psychologists always talk about that positivity negativity ratio, that generally as human beings we need about 5-1 in terms of positivity versus negativity. They're definitely getting more negativity out there right now. So as a leader, it is your job to inspire. I know many of us as leaders, we think that let them just get on with it. I have more important things to do. But right now, the most important thing to do is to look after your salespeople, your people, and encourage them in order for them to go out there and hustle for you.
Siphiwe Moyo, this has been a masterclass in HR strategy in terms of dealing with difficult times, preparing yourself mentally, probably for the past as well, because if we'd have done all these things in the past, imagine how further ahead we'd be in the future. Do you have a last word for folk in terms of encouragement, in terms of where you think things might be going in the future?
I think the last point that I just want to say, Paul, is that never assume anybody will be more interested in your career than you, right? Take responsibility and realize that this is the time to own your stuff. This is the time to own your career and be proactive in terms of managing your career. You don't want to be that person who is totally shocked when management suddenly announces things. You want to be proactive. You want to be involved in those committees. You want to raise your hand. You want to show initiative so that you will know much quicker than anybody else where the business is going.